I think that that's what it comes down to is the further partnership. So it's not what's good for me. It's not what's good for them. It's what's good for us as a unit.
Welcome to the Low Tide Boys, a Swimrun podcast. I'm Chip.
And I'm Chris, and this is episode 164 of the show. Partners Month concludes with something extra special for everyone. Joining us in Studio G for a masterclass on effective teamwork is none other than Brad Stulberg. Brad researches, writes, and coaches on the characteristics that underlie sustainable excellence. No gimmicks or hacks here, just what works. So we're going to get right to this conversation with our friend and former guest of the show, Brad Stulberg. All right, Brad Stulberg, welcome back to the show. Before we get started into this mini masterclass we're going to do, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. It's great to see you guys. How are you?
We're good. We're good. For folks who don't know, we had Brad Stulberg on, I think about a year ago, to promote his new book, The Practice of Groundedness, which is still an awesome book. His forthcoming book, Master of Change, is coming out this September, so stay tuned for that. And Brad, so for this conversation, what we really want to talk about is, you know, for Partners Month, we always talk about teamwork, and that's one of the coolest aspects of Swimrun is sort of the partner aspect. And from your research and writing, I was wondering if you could just kind of give us what you think makes for great teamwork and how we can sort of develop the faculties within Swimrun, within sort of team sports in general, on how we can just be better teammates.
Yeah, I think that, well, Chipper was joking before we got online that the answer is just train together. And that's ultimately probably where we'll end up, but we'll go through a little bit of nuance to get there. So when I think about good teamwork, I think that there are 5 pretty important tenets to make it happen. And this is teamwork not only in sport, but in just about any endeavor, whether that's in a traditional workplace or perhaps something more creative or artistic as well. I think about dropping your ego at the door. I think about how to make good decisions when there are multiple people involved in the decision-making process. I think about playing to individual strengths. I think about appreciating what frustrates you, or at the very least, learning to be okay with what frustrates you. And then I think about this simple equation, which is some trust plus tension equals productive cohesion. So I don't know if we want to go in that order, but I think it probably makes sense to spend just a minute or two on each of these tenets that come to mind for me.
Yeah,
Let's do it.
I love those. I might offer up a place to start, because I think one place when we talk about partners, or what Chris and I hear a lot is, oh, I want to do a swim run, but I want to do it with Brad, but Brad swims at a 1:30 pace and I swim at a 2-minute pace, and then running is a little bit different as well. So to me, that kind of sounds a lot like how playing to your strengths a little bit on not having it, you don't have to be totally in lockstep. But I think one thing that I've been kind of thinking about is like, Chris is a better runner. How do we play into Chris's strength as a runner? So would love to kind of hear your take on that, about from the partnership leaning into each person's strength.
Yeah, so in the spirit of staying focused on swim run, I think the first thing that I'd offer is a little bit of a hedge, which is it depends on what your goals are, right? If your goals are to win a world championship, then you're going to want to find someone that can run and swim really fast, and you better be able to run and swim really fast. But even within that, there will likely be some variability. You know, it's tough to find a clone of yourself, nor would you want to necessarily find a clone of yourself. And now, of course, if you're doing it more for fun or just to finish the race, then perhaps there can even be a bigger delta in performance across the various disciplines. Mm-hmm. So in a situation where you've got one person that might be better on land and another person that might be better in water, I think this is really about having the person who is stronger in that domain kind of lead in that domain. So make decisions, set the pace, be the person that is doing the cognitive and intellectual thinking, so that the other person, the weaker link, can just kind of zone out, stay on the person's feet in the water. If it's on the run, like just keep going. In endurance sports, one of the hardest parts of a long race is staying engaged. And I think here, what's really nice about Swimrun is if you have that differential, you can kind of take turns with who's on point for staying engaged. Now, it's not to say that you can totally zone out, but I'd like to think that on land, the stronger runner has the responsibility of being really focused, and vice versa in the water. So I think like it maybe allows for a little bit of a mental break for the weaker link who just kind of gets to zone out and just focus on keeping the shoulder in view if you're running or keeping the feet in view if you're swimming.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one also dovetails with the first tenet you mentioned, which is, drop the ego. As someone who's the weaker swimmer in this swimrun duo, can you elaborate a little bit on like what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think that it simply means that, listen, you're on a team and both of y'all are having the same shared goal. And at times that means that you've got to be willing to kind of give up your position of power or the chip on your shoulder or your ability to consider yourself a leader if the other person is better fit to do that. I think that it also happens in disagreements. So perhaps if disagreements about how to train or disagreements about how to pace, I think if you firmly believe that your partner is making a reckless decision, then you owe it to them. And that's in the spirit of good teamwork to let them know. But if it's just a difference of opinions between two viable paths forward, then there's got to be deference to the stronger player in that area. And that's what putting your ego all aside is about. You know, there's probably infinite right ways to pace a race. And if y'all have two separate ways that are both right, then dropping the ego is about being able to say, hey, I'm going to go with Chipper's right way instead of my right way because Chipper's stronger here. Or I'm going to go with Chipper's right way instead of my right way because I only feel 70% strong and Chipper feels 100% strong. And then not being passive aggressive or resentful or holding doubt about that decision once it's made, falling into lockstep and going forward.
Yeah, and I'm having an experience flood back to me about this.
Flashback,
Chris, a flashback. Chris is probably knows, but we did this Orcas race up in Washington State a couple of years ago, and I was bonking my brains out pretty heavily the whole time. And I usually am leading most of the swims, but there was a time there where I just couldn't do it. And Chris was like, "I'm taking the swim." And for me, that was a little bit of a hit to my ego of like, "Oh man, I'm running for shit today. I'm slow as all hell. I'm not doing anything right." But what was best for the team was like just giving it up and letting Chris do it. And I was still struggling to hold his feet. That's how bad of a way I was. But I guess
I was definitely the MVP that day.
You did. You were definitely MVP for Orcas for sure. But I think that was also a really good building block for us as a team as well. Is that it let me trust you to not that I didn't trust you to lead the swims, but it was like, hey, there's a really good rep that Chris had on leading a couple swims, sighted well, swam really strong, and did everything really great. Like, okay, he can totally handle swims. I knew he could do it, but it was a good reinforcement for that. But yeah, sometimes it's a little bit tougher to drop the ego at first, but getting I guess the positive reinforcement of like, hey, I let my ego go for a little bit and something good happened for the unit, the partnership. So it's a net positive for everything.
I think that's what it comes down to is the further partnership. So it's not what's good for me. It's not what's good for them. It's what's good for us as a unit. And that might look different than what's good for you, but it's not about you. It's about the two of you finishing in a time and in a way that you're proud of. And obviously, February, Valentine's Day, the same thing holds true in any kind of intimate relationship, whether you're tied at the hip raising kids or tied at the hip trying to swim across a bunch of islands.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, what I love about these tenets is that they all really flow into each other. So, one thing that we always try to think about is how making the best decision with the information that we have. And as teams, there's definitely been situations where, communication could be better. We could have thought of something beforehand or prepared for something better, but but in the heat of racing or in the heat of the moment, sometimes you just have to trust your gut in making good decisions. Do you have any sort of, I don't want to call them hacks, but do you have any sort of strategies that we can use or the teams can use to sort of evaluate how to make decisions like in the heat of the moment?
Right. I think that the most important thing is reframing what it means to make a good or bad decision. So I don't think there's a good or bad decision. I think there's a good or bad decision-making process. Because you could go through your process perfectly and make decision A, and because of some random lightning strike that puts a tree in your path, that turns out to be the quote-unquote wrong decision. But 99 out of 100 times it would have been the right decision. So I think that just getting upstream of that and saying, hey, what's the decision-making process? And did we go about that process properly? And then constantly adjusting as you go. I think people get into trouble when they think, hey, I need to make a right or wrong decision because, again, you're making decisions with the information that you have, and hindsight is 20/20. So I would just get really dialed in as a unit on, hey, what's our decision-making process when we face a proverbial fork in the road or maybe a real fork in the road? Follow that process, but then don't get married to the decision that you made if 2 minutes later on, there's new information. Again, it's not a wrong decision. It's then, okay, get back into that process and adjust. The only wrong thing is to not follow your process or to kind of double down and stay stubborn on A when in fact now there's information that says that you ought to take B.
Yeah. Seems like that but I think on paper that sounds like really easy to do, but in the heat of quote unquote, I hate to say heat of battle because that's not what this is. We're definitely not battling anything except the elements and ourselves. It seems like that comes down to communication and just having trust, which again, all these tenets seem to flow into each other. Mm-hmm. Is there how do we develop that trust and that ability sort of in a team concept?
Well, I think practice makes perfect. So that's the training together again. And then I think having the shared language that there's no such thing as a right or wrong decision. There's only a process. So, in the heat of the moment, it could be, and I'm oversimplifying this for the sake of immediate understanding, but I think this probably applies to more complex situations. Hey, Chipper, right or left, I'm 60% confident right. And then if Chipper says, well, I'm 70% confident left, then you go left. Mm-hmm. And if it turns out you should have been right, well, of course, because I'm not a statistician, but something like 4 out of 10 times, Chipper's going to be wrong and you're going to be right. So it's shifting the language from this or that to probability of this or that, and then going where the probability is higher, and then very quickly back to dropping your ego, being able to say, hey, that was the wrong decision, but not be passive aggressive about it, not feel guilty about it, because the next time around, Chipper might be 80% sure and you might only be 20% sure, and then you damn well better listen to Chipper. Yeah. And then I think the other thing with decision making, whether it's individually or in a team, is just it's very important to have a short memory, because you make a right decision doesn't mean the next one's going to be right. You make a wrong one doesn't mean the next one's going to be wrong. So it's all right, this was the wrong decision. In hindsight, here's what changed. Here's how I got back on course. But, if you're a great 3-point shooter and the ball's in your hands and it's open, you should take the next shot, even if you missed the last one. And I think the same is true with decision making. So it's a little bit long-winded, but I think probabilistically, not this or that. Mm-hmm. Think of a decision as a continuous process of adjusting to new information, not this one-time thing that you're either right or wrong on. And then just constantly be communicating based on levels of probability that something is right or something is wrong. And if you're both clueless, that's kind of empowering, because then all right, to hell with it. You don't have anything to lose.
It's like Rochambeau on that.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, shoot. Okay, we're going left.
Exactly. Rock, paper. I was going to say rock, paper, scissors always is a good decision.
It'll work. And luckily, Swimrun provides so many opportunities to have short mindset. And Chris and I are both former baseball players. And as a hitter, if you're a really good hitter, you're failing 7 out of 10 times. So you better make sure you have really short term memory, because there's going to be new opportunities at every turn. So I think really tactically, something that Chris and I try to do is, if Chris has a good momentum leading into a swim, totally fine to take that swim, and then let's check in and let's re-examine the new data that we have when we get out on the run. How did it go? Hey, you want to take the next one? No, we'll go Chipper, you can lead the next couple, or maybe I'll take the charge on the run. So just constantly communicating and then rechecking in with all the new data points that you have essentially is, I really like that approach.
Yeah, and I think to get really kind of engineering about this, there's only a couple of permutations. There's one of you has a really strong instinct and the other doesn't. You go the way of the person with the strong instinct. Neither of you have a strong instinct. You go rock, paper, scissors, shoot, or the equivalent. Both of you have a strong instinct. You probably defer to the person that has more pattern recognition in that situation.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So again, I feel like I'm sort of just leading this right down these 5 tenets, but I can see where that requires a high level of trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to trust your teammate to have what you call, to achieve what you call productive cohesion. Can you define that for us and tell us what we can do as teammates to sort of lead towards that?
Yeah. So listen, if there's no tension on a team, then you're not pushing each other and you're not getting to an optimal outcome, period. If there's tension without trust, then you're just going to be doubting each other and resenting each other and not really having so much fun out there as a unit. So there's got to be a strong foundation of trust of, hey, I've got your best interest in mind and vice versa. We have our best interest in mind. And then you can get into a lot of tension without it degrading the relationship in the teamwork. How do you develop that trust? I think it's just repetitions, right? It's getting to know each other. What's so nice about sport in particular is you make yourself vulnerable over and over again together. I mean, you're literally like half naked facing the elements, or I guess y'all are in really fancy suits, but
no underwear.
No underwear.
Yeah.
So there you go. But you're out there on an island, no pun intended, and you're facing the elements. And if you do it for long enough, you're both going to have some pretty ugly failures in front of each other. And all the research in the world shows that that's the best way to build trust, is to put yourself in really vulnerable moments with other people. It's why Tony Robbins conferences are so great, because he brings people up on the stage and he makes them super vulnerable, and then they feel like they can trust him and vice versa. Whether that's not manipulative isn't for me to say, but in a situation like this where y'all are in it together, it's going to happen on its own. So I think that's really it. And it does flow from the other things, right? If you drop your ego, if you get practice making decisions that turn out to be both right and wrong in hindsight, then the trust just kind of builds on itself. The best teammates, they can really go at each other. And so long as there's that foundation of care and trust, it elevates performance more than it tanks it. And then at the end of the day, after the thing, like, you're back to being mates, best friends, whatever. So if you're in each other's face during a race, which probably doesn't happen too often, or the equivalent of that, that's fine, so long as after the race you're getting a beer and you're laughing about it. And that's so important, to have that kind of come down period. Because what you don't want to do is end a workout or end a race still at each other. So it's like, how can you have that like big stress response as a unit and then come down from it very quickly to get back to like the playfulness that makes it fun? Yeah.
And not every partnership is as lucky as Chris and I were neighbors and training partners for a decade here. But going back to what we harp on a lot too, about just having communication, even if you met your race partner that morning on the ferry and you're driving over, at least having some conversation about, hey, we're here to have fun. We don't care what time we are, or, oh, we want to try to go for the podium and whatever. And that sort of establishes, from what I've been hearing you say, Brad, is like, that establishes you're on the same page, so you can trust that my brand new partner, we have the same goals. So there's one little brick of trust that we have kind of layered, and you'll be stacking bricks as you're swim running or going along your adventure as well, probably at a faster rate and a higher quantity as well.
Of bricks?
Of bricks. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, like the shared mission or the shared purpose is the first step for sure. And making sure you're on the same page about that. Like you said, is it to have fun? Is it to win? Is it to swing really big and both be okay blowing up? Is it to be more conservative because, you want to make sure that you finish in X time? And You don't want to be misaligned on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that you've written about in the past, sort of this the power of shared purpose. And I think in Swimrun, when I read that in your writing, it's just like, man, that is Swimrun. It is this shared purpose to move through nature as seamlessly as possible. And if you can do it really quickly, it looks really great, feels really great. But if you're not moving quickly, it can still be an amazing adventure and a huge achievement. Can you talk a little bit about, how can you sort of define your shared purpose as a team?
Well, I kind of like how you did it. It's like moving through nature really gracefully or elegantly, and doing it as a team and being willing to adjust. Because all sounds good when y'all are both showing up at 100% or 20%, but when Chris is showing up at 100% and Chipper's showing up at 20%, and Chris still thinks that the goal is to podium, and Chipper thinks that the goal is like not to die,
survive,
then you kind of have to come down to the lower denominator in this sport and be okay with that, and like drop your ego and release from that goal, and then re-get on the same page, right? Because odds are you're going to be on the same page heading into the race, but things happen. And I think in a sport like swim run, when things happen, you almost, have to default to the person who's struggling. Now, that's not to say totally give in. You can push that person that's struggling, but I think that there can be a lot of unhealthy tension if person A's goal is still to win the world championship and person B is cramping up, bonking, dizzy, whatever it is. That's only going to work for so long before the whole thing implodes. So I think it's back to that like quick communication. Hey, where are we at? Is this still the goal that makes sense for us as a unit? And now Chipper might say, and this is where like shared repetition and training and practice together makes sense. Chipper might say, no, Chris, that no longer makes sense. I'm blowing up. And if it's your first race together, then kind of have no choice but to listen to Chipper. But if you've raced 45 times together, then Chris, you have pattern recognition and you can say, you know what, Chipper, give me 5 more minutes before we make that decision.
Yeah. I'll make this dog hunt.
Well, give me 8 more minutes, whatever it is.
Sure. I mean, and I think that's kind of what, I mean, we keep going back to this Orcas Island race because that was really,
it was a huge growth.
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely a race where we were primed for it. I think I would have had either my best race ever or would have had the greatest blow up in the history of swim. Spectacular. And my energy levels were super high the whole time. Chipper had this 4-hour bonk, which was, impressive on its own right to be able to keep going with that. But, after that race, like I actually felt kind of bad with the way he handled it because I was just like, Chipper was just on the tether and I was just pulling and weren't talking too much. I was trying to get him to eat and drink, but I feel like in hindsight, I should have been more communicative and more checking in with him other than being like, hey man, we just got to get to this next thing. I'll handle the swim. You just hold on tight. I was basically just trying to get us to the finish line. And it worked. We still had a decent, all things considered, we had a really great race. But in terms of sort of partnership, I felt like I could have done so much. I could have done a much better job of taking care of Chipper rather than just being like, okay, he's not talking. I'm not going to talk. I'm just going to pull him the whole way.
Maybe, but this is where it's really tricky. Hindsight is, again, 2020. Like you said, you had a good race. Now, if you would have finished and Chipper would have been renal failure, then it's a different story. And you don't know these things till you get to the finish line. And this is where the training together and the pattern recognition is really, really important, especially as you get better and better. Because there's different levels. When you're brand new to something or you've never been on a team, there's like good day, bad day. When you've done it 100 times and you're really experienced, there's like 99.9 stops between good day and bad day. From like, true like renal failure rhabdo to I'm going to barf twice, but I'm going to be okay, to I'm going to need to take about a week off, to I'm actually fine. I just don't feel well, but I can perform well, all the way up to I'm on fire. And I think that the more comfortable you can get in those gradations are really good. It's like in strength training, we talk about, a 0 to 10 RPE scale. And for a beginner, they might really only have like a 3, a 5, and a 10. Mm-hmm. And then eventually you get 0 through 10. And then you get really good. And suddenly there's like 9.25, 9.5, 9.7. And I think that when there's two of you, not only are you having to read yourself, but you're kind of having to read the other person. And is it shitty all caps SHITTY? Is it capital S lowercase HITTY? And you really only get that from reps.
Yeah, is it some hipster spelling like small h, big I, small t?
Yeah. I mean, but it is. It's the reason to just do the sport and to commit to playing the long game, and ideally having the same partner for the long haul. Because like, Chris, coming back to something you said earlier, which is, this stuff sounds good in your head, but it's hard. And to me, that's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is knowing something. Wisdom is being able to apply it in the right situations. And you gain knowledge from listening to podcasts like this, and it helps to have those frameworks, but you don't gain wisdom without experience. So the more experience you have, the easier it is to apply all of these things.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's like the third time my mind's been blown in the 25 minutes.
It is a masterclass, Chris. It is a masterclass.
It is. Brad, so I think the one tenet that we haven't talked about, which probably makes sense we left it to the end, is sort of appreciating what frustrates you. And there certainly are things that frustrate me about Chipper. I'm sure things that frustrate him about me. But I think despite that,
hair.
No, you could comb your hair. Chipper's hair is nice and straight and Swedish and kind of
my hair can't
Scandinavian,
be
and you just look like a hippie.
Yeah. Well, I was just in Seattle, and my buddy was calling me Puerto Rican Jesus. So I think I'd rather go with
Portland.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think what makes our swimrun team special and our friendship special is that it's based on love. Above, the foundation for all of it is love. He still frustrates me just like as a brother would, or a sibling. But I think I'd love you to talk a little bit more about sort of like how can I better, or how can swimrun teams sort of better appreciate the things that frustrate them from their partners, or whether in swimrun or in life.
I think it's a sign of being a mature adult, is realizing that nobody is perfect, and the things that irritate you are perhaps just as much on you as the other person. It's just a part of doing anything with someone else over the long haul is learning to be okay being frustrated and irritated with them. I really do believe that. What kids, they can't really be irritated. They blow up, they melt down, and that's okay because they're kids. They're not emotionally mature. I think a big sign of emotional maturity is not taking things personally or being able to laugh at things that really frustrate you. And if those things really frustrate you and they're making a huge impact on your performance, your happiness, then you got to talk to the person about it, or maybe you got to find yourself a new partner. But nobody's perfect. And if there's always going to be some stuff that frustrates you, then it's kind of like, how can you learn to appreciate it? Or like I said, at the very least, not let it derail you.
Yeah.
Have you accepted me for who I am, Chris?
I have, long time ago. long time ago.
It's good.
Well, Brad, I guess like a final question for you is if we can just sort of sum all this thing up in sort of like, if you could just, you have the podium, you have the mic to tell swimrun teams, hey, you want to have a positive experience in a team setting, go for it. What would that look like for you?
Train and race together very often. Make sure that you have a shared goal. Try to make that goal about growth over time together. That means as people, that means as people working together, that means as athletes, that means as members in this small but very zealous community. And try to give each other the benefit of the doubt. And if you do all that for a year, 2 years, a decade, and it's not working, then don't be afraid to switch.
There it is.
Yeah, there it is. There it is. Brad Stulberg. Book is called The Practice of Groundedness. It's awesome. Everyone should read it. If you want to DM me, I'll tell you all about it. New book, Master of Change, which we're all really excited about, comes out this September. So be on the lookout for that. Brad, thank you so much for taking the time. Love you. Appreciate you.
Yes, thank you so much, Brad.
Same to you, boys. I'm looking forward to following your season this year and seeing what y'all can do in September in Sweden.
Yeah.
We will have you know that there is Swimrun in Seas returning in 2024 in your neck of the woods.
In I forgot what's the lake it's at?
It's in
Hanging Rock.
Hanging Rock State Park.
Hanging Rock. Yeah, I guess Lake James.
I didn't know.
is
Apparently,
closer.
North Carolina has a pretty big swim
There's a
run
hub.
community.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of swimrun. We'll have to get you out there, get you out of your triathlon retirement.
Yeah, man. I don't know about that. I would need a very buoyant wetsuit.
We got you.
We got you covered on that part. Don't worry.
We got you.
How
Brad.
about a motor?
That's where your partner comes in.
Yeah, exactly. Partner selection is key in that respect.
All right, y'all. Well, it's always a pleasure. And to everyone that listened, hopefully you found a thing or two that that is insightful and helpful.
Awesome.
Thanks again. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a review, since that's the best way to help other people discover the show and the sport of swimrun.
Sign up for our newsletter at lowtideboys.com. That's boys with a Z. And check out our meme page at the Low Tide Boys on Instagram. If you have any suggestions for the show or questions for us, send us a DM or an email at lowtideboys@gmail.com.
We'd like to thank Riding Easy Records for our show music, and of course our wives for their support and tolerance of all our swimrun activities, podcast, and other stuff.
Yeah, other stuff.
Way
to keep it PG. Finally, you can support our efforts on Patreon. Until next time, get out there and go for a swim.
Go for a run,
Then another swim.
then another run,
And then another swim.
and then another run.
And then just keep going until you're done.
So you're done. Or maybe can't
And then
stop.
stop.